Hello and welcome to a quick video which will talk you through your English literature exams for 2022. As you know, there's been quite significant changes actually to both the format of the exams, how they are going to be laid out on the paper, and the timings. So I hope that this video will be useful to some of you and alleviate any questions that you may have. Just a reminder of the English exam timelines. Your first exam that you have for English is a language paper. It's your language paper 1, which is 1 extract of a fiction text, 5 questions, and then writing a narrative or descriptive story. Your second exam, your literature paper 1 exam, is on Wednesday the 25th, which I'll talk you through shortly. Then you've got your literature paper 2 exam on the 8th of June, and that particular week you've got 2 English exams, finishing off on Friday the 10th with your language paper 2 exam, which I spoke about in the last video. 2 extracts, non-fiction, and 2 transactional writing. There is advanced information for that particular exam. So this video is just focusing on your literature exams and the way that they are laid out, the format and the timings. Now, back in November, we had to make a decision as a centre as to what we were going to sit our cohort. We were able to drop, if you like, a particular component of the literature exam. And because we had already studied Shakespeare, we had already studied an Inspector Calls, which both are compulsory. There was no options with that. We'd also begun studying 19th century prose and made a good dent in the poetry anthology that we thought it made sense to get rid of and not focus on the unseen poetry element. So that is the element that we as a cohort decided to not sit. Also, we know that many of our students choose not to go on to study English beyond GCSE, and we would confidently know that we had given our students a full diet, a full broad curriculum experience of English if we stuck with these particular texts. Those that are into numbers as well, statistically, these are our higher performing elements as well. So it was a very considered option, so that all our students were covering every element that they possibly could, because they're still sitting their poetry element. I know it led to some disappointment. I think some of them wanted to drop the book, but never mind, there you are. That was the decision we then we made in November. So this is what the 2 papers look like, and I will go through them in a bit more detail shortly. But basically, it's the same in that to get your English literature qualifications, you have 2 separate papers. But what's different this year is it's only made up of 2 elements. In previous years, literature paper 2 was made up of 3. And also what is on the papers is very different. So your child may have come home to practice a literature paper 1, and it would have had Shakespeare and anthology on there, for example. So it is a little confusing, a little muddled. This is why I want to make it very clear today with this video, and it's only going to be like this for this year. So literature paper 1, it's made up of 2 one-hour papers. So you've got a Shakespeare element and an Inspector Calls element, and instead of having all the questions on one particular paper, which we normally have, you just have it in one little booklet, if you like. So I'll show you, I've got examples on this video in a moment, but your student for literature paper 1 will sit the 1-hour Shakespeare paper. They then will factor in the extra timers, that element of the exam will then finish, and then they will switch. They will collect the Shakespeare papers in, hand out the inspector calls papers. They then have an hour to sit that, and that's on the Wednesday, the 25th of May. And then the literature paper 2 is the same format. You've got those 2 papers. You sit the poetry element for 1 hour. They will then say when the exam finishes, they will collect those papers in. They will then hand out the 19th century prose papers. Your student will sit their hour allocated to answer that one. They're then collected in. And that's what we're going to do now, is just break down what this looks like step by step. So on the screen now are the sample assessment papers that we've been given for 2022. We've only been given one of each, and that's a screenshot of the front of them. I don't know if you can see the one at the top. It says English Literature Component 1, Shakespeare, 1 hour, and then it lists the text that your student may have studied. So they'd be handed out a paper that looks like that. They'd sit that 1 hour. Once that's finished, that gets collected in, and then the second paper would be handed out, English Literature Component 1, post 1914 prose drama, and then they would answer that, and it's collected in. So let's just focus a bit more detail on each paper. So as I said, the change is that this paper, the first section of this exam, just has the Shakespeare questions on it. Your child will have to find and focus on the question that applies to them. I think I might have written the classes wrong here, but for example, Miss Price's class, Miss Harris's class have studied Romeo and Juliet. Pretty certain the rest of you are looking at Macbeth. So you would find which page your question is on, and you would answer that one. It's either Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth. The Othello, Much Ado About Nothing, Henry V, The Merchant of Venice are just the other options that other schools may have studied. You get a separate answer booklet in the exam that you would write your answers on as well. So this is the sample material that we've been given for 2022, and you will see that the actual format and the layout of the questions are the same. I've smushed them onto that screen. This actually is on 2 separate pages in the booklet, but at least you can see what it looks like. The format is the same, so your child will be very familiar with the fact that you get 2 questions on Shakespeare. They spend 20 minutes on the first one, which is based on the extract and is worth 15 marks. Then the second question, which is worth 25 marks, they'd spend longer on, 40 minutes, and we call that an essay question. That's where you look at a theme or a character across the whole of the text, not just on that single extract. So the first part is the extract only, the second part is the whole text. We will go through how to approach this particular question in a separate video. There is a link to this paper here, and this PowerPoint, I will make sure that it's available for you so you can get this particular sample paper because it's a new one. So this particular question is asking you to focus on Juliet's thoughts and feelings at that point in the play, and the question is, how does Shakespeare present love in Romeo and Juliet? So we've got the extract question looking at the character of Juliet. We've got the essay question, which is asking them to look at the theme of love across the whole of the play. For those of you that are studying Macbeth, same thing. I've smushed them together, but here is an example of what the 2 pages of the exam on Macbeth looks like. Again, it's the same format. You've got an extract question where the students would focus their response on that particular passage which is provided for them. You spend 20 minutes on it. It's worth 15 marks. Look at how Macbeth speaks and behaves here. How do you think an audience might respond to Macbeth at this point in the play? And then the second part is based on the whole text, 25 marks, 40 minutes, write about Lady Macbeth and how she's presented at different points in the play. Again, there's a link to this particular paper down there. We will go through how to approach the extract question and how to approach the essay question later on, and it's the same that we're going to be delivering in school. So those of you that are coming in school for targeted intervention, this is what we will be going through in school. So those of you that aren't, you've at least still got the same opportunity. So the Shakespeare element will then be over. You're given an hour and the invigilators will collect in your Shakespeare paper. And if you are entitled to extra time, I'm pretty certain that if you are staying in the hall with the rest of the students, the people who are allocated an hour, it'll be pens down, your exam is over, extra time as you now have your additional 12 minutes or 13 minutes, however long it is. The rest of the cohort sat in silence while that happens. The extra timers will then be told time's up, pens down, the papers will then be collected in. So that particular break will not be any longer than 20 minutes. Papers will be collected in, and this will all be in exam conditions. This will then be handed out, your inspector calls paper. So again, here is a focus on the front page of what it looks like. The biggest change for inspector calls is that you get an hour. Previously, you would only have 45 minutes to answer this question, and we made the decision to still give you only 45 minutes in our warm-up and our mocks, just so that you were used to that pressure of time, but you've actually got an hour instead of 45 minutes to acknowledge the fact that you've not had as many mocks and as much time in school as previous cohorts. So you find the section relevant to our school. We studied in inspector calls. It's usually always near the bottom. There are all the other options that other centres choose to study, but we just all as a cohort look at an inspector calls, and again there is a link to this paper. So here is what it looks like. Hopefully your child will be very familiar with this. The format of it, the layout of it is exactly the same. There is a question and there is an extract, and they are to base their response on that extract and then link it to the wider play. Here's a zoom in on the question. So 1 hour, use the extract below and your knowledge of the whole play to answer the question. And it is right about the theme of responsibility and an inspector calls and how it is presented at different points of the play. You get a mark out of 35 for your inspector calls response, and then 5 for spelling, punctuation and grammar. That's actually the same for Shakespeare. I meant to say that about Shakespeare. It's 35 for Shakespeare and then 5 for spelling, punctuation and grammar. So you get an extra 15 minutes than previous cohorts. So those of you that miss out your E in Priestley and don't write Burling with a capital B, marginal gains, reread and proofread and check that you've completed everything. But everything else is the same for inspector calls, other than the fact that it's you just have an extra 15. Just as an aside, look for when it says turnover or end of exam. Now for this particular paper, the turnover is usually because there is another question relating to another text, but just please be mindful of if it says turnover, there may be something else relevant for you on there. It's always best to check, always best to turn over, same with a language paper, just for peace of mind. And again, we will show you how to approach an inspector calls question in a separate video. So that is it. That's the end of your literature paper 1. They will all be collected in. Again, extra timers. They'll say pens down for the hour. The rest of the cohort will stay in exam conditions. Extra timers get their extra time. Then it's pens down, the papers will be collected in. So that's on Wednesday the 25th. So Shakespeare and then an in spectacles. The literature paper 2, which is on Wednesday the 8th of June, and they're all in the morning. All the English exams are in the morning. It's exactly the same in fact that it's made up of 2 elements. The 2 elements you've got is the poetry anthology. That is not usually found on literature paper 2, so that might throw people in a bit of a muddle, but literature paper 2 for this year is the poetry anthology, and you have 1 hour on that one, and your pre-19th century prose, which is 1 hour, which your student has either studied Jekyll and Hyde or A Christmas Carol. There are some sample assessments for 2022, which I will show you now. So English literature number 2 is basically the elements about this particular exam. The poetry exam is the same. You get 1 hour as you normally would, and it's based on this anthology that the students were given. If they've lost it or forgotten it or not brought it home, we've got PDF versions, we've got electronic versions on the shared drive that they can access, and you can also get it via the Educast website. Again, you will notice that this paper is just about the poetry anthology. So this is what the exam will look like. You will always be given a list of all the poems that is in the anthology as a reminder. So you don't need to remember, we don't have that worry about recalling all 18 poems. And then you've got your questions, and the questions are the same. You've been working really hard on these. You've got a 20-minute question based on the named poem, we call it the printed poem, and that will be like this one. The named poem is A Wife in London, 20 minutes, 15 marks. Read the poem below. A Wife in London is a poem about loss. How does Thomas Hardy present loss in the poem? Refer to the context of the poem in your answer. Context is key. You must talk about the context with the poetry, and then that's printed out. And then the second part of this question is where you have to compare that named poem with one other. So choose one other poem from the anthology in which the poet also writes about loss. Compare the way the poet presents loss in your chosen poem with the way Thomas Hardy presents loss in A Wife in London, and they spend longer on that, so they would choose a particular question that they might want to compare it with. Now this one says end of paper. So end of paper means there is nothing else at the end of it. If your student turned over, it would probably say this page is left intentionally blank. I cannot stress enough, I would still look because there is nothing worse than just missing something. It's just good exam practice. That. So that's a closer version of closer screenshot of what the poetry anthology questions look like. We will go through how to approach that question in another video, but the timings, the marks available, the format is exactly the same. So the poetry anthology will be element will be over, pens down, extra timers get their extra time, everyone's in exam conditions, pens down, the papers are then collected in. That whole process will take no longer than 20 minutes. This is not a toilet break. I cannot stress enough, I would advise you to just avoid going to the toilet and disrupting the flow of your thoughts with all the exams. Go to the toilet before you sit the exam. Just try that. I think students will naturally have a collective sense of relief in these breaks and possibly think about their bladder. Just try not to go. Obviously, if you need to go, then go. That, you know, there are people there that will make that happen for you, but we want this to be as slick as possible. And in previous years, this particular paper would be 2.5 hours long, straight through, bomb. So and it will all be in exam conditions. Right. This is the last section then, this is the last bit. This is what the sample 2022 booklet might look like. There is a list of all the potential books that as a centre the cohorts could have studied. Your student either studied A Christmas Carol or Jekyll and Hyde, but they've got 45 minutes. They've got longer than previous years. They've got that hour. We did the mock in, can't remember when it was now. I want to say February. Anyway, we only gave them 45 minutes for that mock because that's what they were used to, and we thought it was best to keep them pushing for the 45 minutes so that they've got a bit more breathing space when they are in the exam. I may have got these classes wrong, but I'm pretty certain Mrs. Lords, Miss Crump, Miss Darville, Miss Harris have all studied Christmas Carol. My Mrs. Murray's 11Y1 and my 11X2 and Miss Price's class have all studied Jekyll and Hyde. So just make sure that you answer the question that's relevant to you. A Christmas Carol is usually at the top, and the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is usually towards the bottom. Please only answer the one question on the one text you have studied. People do make that error. Okay, so the format and the layout is exactly the same as what your student will be used to. The main difference is they get longer. You get your question, you get your passage available. So 1 hour, one text. Use the extract below and your knowledge of the whole novel to answer this question. This particular one is right about some members of the Cratchit family and how they are important. So you'd start by answering about the Cratchit family in that particular passage and then link it to the whole. Same with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is the exact question we did in the mocks, I believe. Same thing. 1 hour, start on the extract. This one's focusing on Dr. Jekyll and how he's presented at different points in the novel. Focus on the extract, talk about the novel as a whole. So it's pretty similar. But again, watch out for videos coming up on that. But then that's it. It is over. Both literature exams are now over. Your papers will be collecting and you'll be dismissed, and you can breathe a big sigh of relief and just look forward to your language exam that you've got coming up. I hope this was useful. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me or your English teacher if you've got any questions. Like I say, look out for these materials to practice and download. Take care. Good luck.